to Phenomenon Radio, the show that covers thought-provoking breakthroughs in the fields of UAP UFOs to discover fascinating truths, first-hand accounts, and investigative insights into the expanding confluence of physical and mental exposure to this worldwide phenomenon. Hosted by Emmy award-winning investigative journalists, Earthfiles reporter and editor Linda Moulton Howe, and world-renowned experiencer of the 1980 Rendlesham Bentwaters incident, John Burroughs. And now, leading off tonight's program, here's Linda Moulton Howe.
Saturday, December 16th, and Monday, December 18th, were historic days in the annals of the U.S. government's 70 years of covering up the alien presence behind UFOs, with strict policies of denials and lies ordered in 1947 by President Harry S. Truman in the interests of national security. The government was running scared after the UFO crashes and alien body retrievals in the Roswell, New Mexico region in July 1947. The new crack in official U.S. government policies of denials that began on Saturday, December 16th, was with the New York Times headline, quote, "Glowing Auras and Black Money, the Pentagon's Mysterious UFO Program," close quote. The Times website contained a 34-second jet fighter gun camera infrared video of a UFO doing a rotation without losing altitude off the coast of San Diego, California during 2004 training exercises. It was officially released by the Defense Department's Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. That agency was unknown to most everyone, except insiders who knew that Nevada Senator Harry Reid, who was the U.S. Senate Majority Leader in 2007, was able to get $22 million allocated to the Defense Department. Senator Reid said the money was, quote, "for the specific study of extraordinary technologies defying Earth-known physics that were moving in Earth's skies seen by hundreds of military pilots," close quote. 2 days later, on Monday, December 18, 2017, the Washington Post released a 2-minute and 45-second longer infrared gun camera video identified as Gimbal, all caps Gimbal, referring to technology. The background information states that for this longer, more sensitive video, quote, "the date, location, and other information have been removed by the originating authority as part of the release approval process," close quote. Earthfiles understands from an interview that the Washington Post did with Navy Commander David Fravor, who saw this UFO, that the location might have been further south of San Diego toward Mexico or even the Middle East. In 2004, Commander Fravor was the commanding officer of the VFA 41 Black Aces, a U.S. Navy strike fighter squadron of FA-18 Hornet fighter planes doing an exercise some 60 to 100 miles off the coast between San Diego and Ensenada, Mexico. And this was to be in advance of a deployment to the Persian Gulf for the Iraq War. Commander Fravor told the Washington Post, quote, "As I got closer, as my nose is starting to pull back up, the UFO, accelerates and it's gone, faster than I'd ever seen anything in my life," close quote. In the 2004 San Diego video provided to the New York Times, the background information states, quote, that UFOs in that video, which is the first one in the New York Times, the short one, the UFO's orientation is now perpendicular to the horizon, and despite headwinds that have been measured at 120 knots, 138 miles an hour. This maneuver is executed in a manner that is inconsistent with current principles of aerodynamics and possibly indicative of a vacuum environment. As the video concludes, the object's orientation and performance seem to defy current principles of physics, such as atmospheric resistance and normal aerodynamic forces. During the orientation change, the UFO also slows to a near stop, but does not change altitude, close quote. Imagine something in the air doing a 100-degree rotation, and that the corner that is rotating does not change one whit its elevation. To skilled professional military pilots, the UFO crafts accelerate like nothing ever seen before and travel at astoundingly fast speeds, stop in midair, do 90-degree angle turns, brighten and dim, and seem to expand in size and then disappear. In the 3 weeks since the New York Times and the Washington Post articles seemed to signal that the big secret that we're not alone in this universe could finally be shared with the world public, pushback has come from many sources, even efforts to discredit the 2 infrared gun camera videos. However, respected Navy Commander David Fravor backs up the Gimbal infrared released to the Washington Post with his 18 professional years as a Navy pilot. Some political analysts about the pushback since December 16, 2017, say the persistence of insider political tension about whether to tell the world the truth about an alien presence versus everyone keep your mouth shut about an alien presence. This is a direct reflection of what is called the war in the Pentagon. And it's about letting the world know or not know the facts about UFOs and ETs. One man who is familiar with political tensions around UFOs since World War II is historian and author Richard Dolan. But what exactly are UFOs? And why is the Pentagon office that officially sanctioned the release last month of the 2 gun camera infrared videos called Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program? On New Year's Day, January 1st, 2018, Richard published on his website an article entitled The Pentagon and UFOs, Assessing the Revelations. He concludes that, quote, "This story looks to me to be an exercise in damage control. Authors answer to editors who answer to publishers, and you can't just throw things out there willy-nilly if you are writing for the New York Times. You just can't," close quote. But whose damage needs to be controlled? And why is there a pushback now? After this short break, joining us on Phenomenon Radio will be historian and author Richard Dolan to talk with John Burroughs and me about the fallout since the New York Times and the Washington Post had the breaking news 3 weeks ago of official Pentagon-released gun camera infrared videos of UFOs in 2004 that defied Earth-known physics.
You're locked in to KGRAradio.com. Thank you all so much for joining us. This is Phenomenon Radio Live. All right, everybody, special guest U.S. historian, author, and publisher Richard M. Dolan will join the program right after these messages. Don't go anywhere.
I'm Richard Dolan. When I'm not hosting my radio program, The Richard Dolan Show on KGRA, or writing new books on UFOs, I run a publishing company. I'm proud to say that Richard Dolan Press has published some of the most fascinating books available on UFOs and related subjects. They include Dr. Bruce Maccabee's classic analysis of the UFO cover-up, David Marler's breakthrough book on triangular UFOs, Dr. Richard Sauter's unique work on underground bases, and other classics by Grant Cameron, Chase Kletsky, and Dr. Bob Wood, not to mention intriguing works by Eve Lorgan and Laurie MacDonald that deal with truly bizarre phenomena. I'm proud to publish such high quality and original works, and there are several amazing books about to be released over the next few months. Go to richarddolanpress.com to learn more.
How to be a great dad in 15 seconds. Bike ride, go fish, walk in the park, phone call, milkshake, play catch, picnic, fly a kite, tell jokes, laugh, talk, read a story, tell a story, bumper cars, swing set, bowling, pillow fight, cut loose, stay tight. Whew. Because the smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life. Take time to be a dad today. Call 877-4DAD-411 or visit fatherhood.gov. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Ad Council.
UFOcongress.com is where you go to check out the Guinness World Record's largest UFO conference. The next event is going to be held February 14th through the 18th, 2018. At UFOcongress.com, you'll find out why so many people go to the UFO Congress. It's because we have the best speakers, the most amazing venue, and very affordable prices. Don't forget the website's UFOcongress.com. We look forward to seeing you at the next International UFO Congress.
Your contact for current news and trending topics. KGRAradio.com.
Thanks for staying with us on KGRAradio.com. Exclusive presentation of Phenomenon Radio Live tonight for another breaking interview on the trending UFO story made public by the Washington Post with tonight's very honored guest, returning Richard M. Dolan. To start tonight's interview, here's Linda Moulton Howe. Linda?
Thank you, Race. And it was the New York Times and the Washington Post that broke this story because of the video being given to them. And Rich, I want to say that I am so happy you are back with us on this first week of January 2018 to try to help give some of your brilliant perspective on what might be happening, since there is now so much pushback against what we really did think was going to be an honest breakthrough finally from the United States government, that we're not alone, and that military pilots, as Harry Reid said, hundreds of military pilots have been reporting encounters, doing gun camera on various kinds of unidentified flying objects for a long time. But in your article that you put on your website, Richard Dolan Press, on January 1st, 2018, when you said, quote, "This story looks to me to be an exercise in damage control." Could you go in now to what you think the damage is that's being controlled and who specifically is trying to control now?
And thanks for having me on, Linda, and my greetings to John and Race. I do. I think that on the one hand, it's been said by some people out there that this is, as they would go as far as to say this is a false flag, implying that there's, highly deceptive information or an agenda to accomplish some other unstated goal. I think that's going a little bit too far, but I would say, because I think the information that is put out seems to be genuine, but it also seems to be incomplete. And I consider this damage control because this whole story was really opened up actually by the press conference from a couple of months ago by Tom DeLonge from formerly of the band Blink-182. His To the Stars Academy press conference. A lot of people in the UFO field, of course, are familiar with this. Luis Elizondo presented there. Jim Semivan presented there. Hal Puthoff sat there, and a lot of other very, very impressive scientists and engineers were at that press conference. And it is at that press conference where the world really got to know in a major way about the 2004 incident, because it was one of the main things that was discussed there. It's obviously a very dramatic and I think difficult to explain incident. Elizondo, who was running the Pentagon's program, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, was clearly talking. He was clearly unhappy with the Pentagon. And it seemed to me it was only a matter of time before this story was going to take on a great deal more momentum.
It is a fact, I believe, established in both the New York Times and the Washington Post that Louis Elizondo, head of the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, is a close, good friend of our Secretary of Defense, Mattis.
So that's another important point here. In fact, it's interesting that you mentioned that because I don't know how to get this confirmed one way or the other, but I had heard at least a claim that Mattis wasn't even aware of this program. So that would not seem to jibe with the fact that they were close friends.
Except that it was supposed to be that Louis Elizondo has demonstrated that he could keep his quote unquote lips shut while he was doing this, while being a very close friend
of the Secretary of Defense.
Yeah.
Well, anyway,
just remember he wasn't Secretary of Defense during
this
time.
That's right.
Yeah, that's right. He's Trump's Secretary of Defense, not under Obama.
Right.
That's right, John. But I guess what I just wanted to say in summing up my reason why I look at this as damage control is you have to look at the history of the New York Times and, for that matter, the Washington Post in relationship to UFOs. Both of these newspapers have been unremittingly hostile to anything having to do with UFOs for effectively their entire history. The New York Times, of course, sowed the first lie about UFOs back in 1947 itself, about Roswell. And whatever one thinks about Roswell, it's a provable fact that the New York Times lied about Roswell with the weather balloon explanation, which was not true, and they put it out simply because the Army told them that. And they've never changed their note ever since. The Washington Post is even more stridently hostile to UFOs, in my opinion, over the last 15 years than even the New York Times. But both. So when we get information that seems to support the existence of UFOs in these, we have to really ask ourselves, what is going on here with the New York Times? Have they stopped working with the CIA all of a sudden, or have they stopped working with the Pentagon all of a sudden? No, clearly they have not. So there's something else happening. And I think it is damage control, yes, because when you look at the program itself, the AATI program, $22 million we're told over about 5 years, which is less than chump change in terms of what the Pentagon spends for a program that is dealing with objects, according to Elizondo, that are consistently displaying impossible to explain maneuvers over sensitive airspace. It's, as he said in one of his statements, I think to Politico, if this were Russian or Chinese, it would be an obvious response that we would be getting from this, but they would be all over the news. But he says they're coming from the skies over our facilities, and it's nothing but crickets. And so it doesn't make sense. There's clearly a story behind this program, and there's clearly got to be another program that is managing or dealing with what we would call UFOs or UAP.
Yeah, just a quick insert. You and I and John, we all do know that the background to all of this, that the chessboard is massive beyond 2005 to it was 2007 to 2012, 5 years. That to draw a line in the sand in this release in the New York Times and the Washington Post, that it was almost as if they were trying to say that this is the first effort by the Department of Defense to analyze all of this wild phenomena in the skies beginning in 2005. So that, in a way, is even a cover to the last 70 years since World War II. Like, why are they even trying to do that?
Yeah, right. It's occurring in a historical vacuum. And this is, of course, typical of all American mainstream news coverage. I mean, everything is divorced from historical analysis, which is why, frankly, people don't understand anything, because when things happen, it just seems like one damn thing after another, and there's no analysis behind it to help people understand what's actually going on. Same here. And, I don't want to get all over the case of the authors of the New York Times article. I mean, there's only so much that they can do in one article, and we can't expect them realistically to give the entire history of the military's engagement with UFOs in one article. I understand that. But even so, the way that the information was portrayed, it's very, very discreet. It's very limited to this one piece, indicating, or at least giving an impression that, as you were saying, like they've never looked at UFOs before, which of course is not true. They've been dealing with this as a problem since the 1940s, and we know this is inarguable fact. We have declassified documents to prove it. Case closed. But the real question is, well, there's a lot of real questions. If there's damage control, who's doing the damage? Right. Why would we assume the New York Times is working on behalf of the government? Well, that's an easy one. They have always been an official voice of the U.S. government. I mean, in every instance, every major instance in American history that I can think of, the New York Times has worked hand in glove with the U.S. government, whether it's the Gulf of Tonkin, whether it's all of the illegal and destructive wars that the U.S. has waged over the last generation or more. The New York Times, with weapons of mass destruction in 2003, obviously, just promoting those series of lies. And through, all of the presidential administrations, they've been right on board with promoting the U.S. government narrative. So, and the U.S. intelligence community narrative of things. There was Operation Mockingbird, which we all know about through the 50s and 60s and beyond, in which the CIA had their people in mainstream media. And we know all about Mockingbird, and it's a done deal, and it's in history. But Mockingbird continues.
Yeah, Walt Disney was taking orders from the CIA types or at least the government during World War II and beyond. And you're right, the New York Times has always had somebody from the alphabet agencies who would either squash or deflect, and that's been described. And
that's right.
And along these lines of what is true, what is not true, John Burroughs today on January 4th, 2018, has been doing some research on where was the Nimitz, the word that kept being associated on December 16th and 17th with the first video, the 34-second video. And here, John, go into what it is that you have found, and then Rich can talk about some perspective on why there would be this discrepancy, perhaps.
Okay, Linda, first of all, can you break down the two videos that were presented as evidence and where they claim they took place? And the second actual video is really not been identified first. And then I've even come up some more while we're on the air about the Princeton. Okay. I think I know when the Gimbal incident took place now, and it wasn't the date they gave.
Okay, I'll just do this briefly.
Have they given the date of the Gimbal video in any case, John?
No, that's classified.
Fravor, remember, Fravor is the Gimbal incident in the Washington Post on December 18th, 2017. Fravor is linked to that. Fravor, when they write about it in the Washington Post, they used the year 2004, but now it has occurred to me, Rich and John, that might have been just out of frustration of confusion by the writers of the Washington Post, because the first one had already been out 48 hours earlier, and that said 2004 in San Diego. And it's important to repeat this part. 2 days after the New York Times release of that 34-second video where the object does the 100-degree rotation and doesn't change a whit in elevation, 2 days later, on Monday, December 18, 2017, the Washington Post released a 2-minute and 45-second longer infrared gun camera video identified as Gimbal, all caps Gimbal, which refers to the technology. The background information with this video on the 18th states that for this longer, more sensitive video, quote, the date, location, and other information have been removed by the originating authority, does not define originating authority, as part of the release approval process, close quote. So that means it came in the wake of the 2004 San Diego identified first video. And everybody,
Right.
I think, assumed it was 2004. And I think a lot of us thought.
Yeah, but Linda, the problem is the 2004 one isn't correct either, and I'll explain to you why. What I've just done a little research on.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, so just so that listeners can understand where we're going here, they excuse me, they need to understand these are two very distinct videos. One we can call the Tic Tac video. This is the one that originally came out. That Commander Fravor associated with.
The Tic Tac is the first one.
And the first one date's not proper either. I think
the first one, which was said to be, well, the Tic Tac one is said to be November 2004. And the objects look clearly different.
Yeah, and the point that they make in the accompanying material, the first video is supposed to get across the idea of something that can defy physics that we know on the Earth, do 100-degree rotation and keep the point that is in the air at 20-some thousand feet without moving. The second one, the eerier one, the one that they say is the most sensitive, this is the object that you see. It's in front, it's changing, it's metamorphosizing, nobody knows what it's doing, and then in less than maybe a tenth of a second, it goes from the center of the gun camera and it's gone. And that's when Commander Fravor says, I've never seen anything move that
Can
fast.
I set the dates up, though? The first one was supposedly filmed when?
2004, but no date given. No month date given.
It was almost impossible to be in 2004 because the Nimitz went into a PIA in early 2004 after it deployed to the Middle East and returned to home port in November of 2003 and was unavailable pretty much the rest of the year. So the fact that the Nimitz was out in the ocean at that point in time is almost impossible. Now, could the airplanes technically have flown out of land? Yeah, because that's where they keep them when the ship's in port being worked on for maintenance. But the idea that it even happened. But the interesting thing is if you go to the Princeton, okay? Now, the Princeton shows prior to its deployment in March of 2005. So the Nimitz came back in the fall of 2003, went into maintenance for most of 2004. But in 2005, it deployed.
But the incident, John, happened we're told in November of 2004. So that's at the end of the year. Are you saying that the Nimitz was still out of commission?
It was basically out of commission from February till the end of the year. Yes.
Till the end of the year. Okay.
PIA. Okay. But the interesting thing, if you go and look in the Princeton, prior to the deployment again to the Middle East in 2005, in March in 2005, they did an exercise with the Nimitz off the coast of California.
In 2005.
Right.
Oh, very interesting. So the Princeton, are you saying the Princeton was not off the coast of California in November of 2004?
Well, no, it couldn't have been. They were the ship that it would have supported. The ship it supported was was in maintenance, but it does say in its own records in March of 2005, the Nimitz and them conducted an exercise off the coast of California and Mexico.
Yeah. So they would have moved the date one year back, probably to see if anybody like you would do research and find something different. Now, how does that fit, Rich, into what you use that phrase that somebody's trying to do damage control? What is it that may be about to leak or happen that they want to deflect everybody from the New York Times to the Guardian away from March of 2005?
That's very interesting, Linda. I don't have an answer off the top of my head for that. But if this is true, and, I have no reason to doubt what John is saying here, but so let's
just go look at the
it.
Prince's operational history.
Yeah.
It's right there from 11 to 24 March 2005. The group conducted a pre-deployment joint task exercise off of California prior to deployment. Now, what did they say? They were involved. This incident took place during a pre-deployment exercise having to do with deployment to the Middle East.
Right.
And they didn't do this exercise until March of 2005 prior to deployment, which is standard Navy procedure. They do go out after they come out of maintenance and they do training, and then they turn around and do a pre-deployment exercise before they depart. So the dates are wrong, first of all, which I think has to do with FOIA. Anybody that's worth their salt that really wants to know is going to start asking FOIA questions about this deployment, what they saw in these footages. So if you give the wrong dates right away, you're not going to get what you want.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to know. I mean, the date is supposed to be November 14, 2004. I mean, that's what we've been told, but
on the first short video.
Yes, correct. So I would like to know, I think people would like to see what is the actual basis for that evidentiary claim, unless it's just someone's statement. If it's someone's statement that it's only that it's November 14th, then they need to produce some more evidence for sure.
Right, because doesn't it say both the Princeton and the Nimitz were present, correct?
Yes.
Yes, that's
right. And they were at a pre-deployment joint task exercise off the coast of California.
Yes,
that's what they got. Right.
Yeah, and having to do with Escondido, Mexico.
Right. Well, it didn't happen until March of 2005. Then they deployed in May of 2005 and were on a 6-month deployment to the Middle East, which there is some inside information possibly that's when that incident took place. And the fact of the matter was, it does say straight in Wikipedia, which, some people don't totally agree with, but that they did a PBS documentary that was heavily focused on Commander David Fravor's involvement in that 6-month deployment.
In May
I've got the wiki
2005.
Page. Yeah.
From May till November of 2005.
So if they were in off the coast of San Diego, there would have been a very short window, it seems, when that could have happened.
Yeah.
Right.
Otherwise, it would be more likely that this would be in the Middle East.
And
Linda, to answer your question, if there's damage control, I mean, we're only speculating here. I mean, I have no way of knowing this off the top of my head, but let's just say there was a dramatic encounter in the Middle East with some radical technology.
And they don't want anybody to look at 2005, and so they're throwing out this 2004, which now tonight I think
having you look in a different part of the world,
that it's wrong, and that we all have to now start doing a hell of a lot of research about 2005 in relationship to these videos.
Now, John, what did you say? You said inside information about this being from the Middle East, and you just kind of went right on by that. But where's this coming from?
Let's just say that the information I've received is they're 2 separate videos, 2 different time frames, 2 different geographical locations. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now, if you put together the fact that the Princeton and Nimitz did an exercise, which is a true statement, but not until the spring of 2005, then they deployed in the late spring, early summer of 2005. It appears because if you look at the first video, it was a training exercise, correct? Which there is now proof that this did take place, but on a different date. Then you went to a real deployment, and it was in the Middle East. Then that would add them together, considering the fact that you would classify for sure any deployments, active operations over a training exercise also.
Is it possible, I'm just putting this out there, that the official locations of the Princeton and or the Nimitz were not accurately given in the sources that you were looking at? In other words, would there be reason to think that that they actually were off the coast of San Diego in November of 2004, even though some kind of official statement puts it somewhere else?
Then they would have completely lied about the fact that the Nimitz was in
maintenance.
Yeah,
Right.
it was in for maintenance, and that means it's not available. And what I mean by that is there's different levels of maintenance, but whenever an aircraft carrier goes in for maintenance, the air wing's not on. And matter of fact, even when if most people will know this, when the aircraft carrier is in port, it's not on the aircraft carrier. It's on the airfield that's adjacent to wherever
The air wing is not available, you just said. So
well, the air wing is not on the aircraft carrier.
on
Matter
the
of
aircraft.
fact, most of the times the wing will leave the ship the day before, comes into port and land on the airfield, like in Norfolk, Washington or in San Diego. So they're on the airfield itself. But the key to this is if it happened in November of 4, it didn't happen with the Nimitz being out at sea. Now, could the planes have been doing training out in in that area without the aircraft carrier being involved? Possibly. But the fact of the matter, they say the aircraft carrier was involved with the Princeton in a pre-training exercise prior to deployment prior to deployment. Well, these are all records straight from their logs. The Princeton and the Nimitz were doing an exercise in March in 2005 prior to deployment to the Middle East, which it did deploy in May of 2005. And the Air Wing commander mentioned was on the Nimitz during that time frame. And he was assigned to it and doing operational stuff over in the Gulf after that exercise, and a PBS documentary was done on it also.
Okay, so I just want to get back with the Princeton because according to the official account of this, it was the Princeton which for 2 weeks was tracking unknown objects off the coast of California, and what they were tracking was quite extraordinary from what we were told. But again, I just want to make sure, John, so what your information is saying is that the Princeton would not have been off the coast of San Diego at that time.
Well, it wouldn't have been as they said it. The Nimitz and the Princeton were not together in 2004.
But the Princeton could have been there alone.
Well, yeah, the Princeton wasn't assigned to maintenance. The Princeton itself was available, but it would be assigned to the task force when it deployed. Okay, it's a joint task force, right? And it does say in its own records that 11 to 24 March 2005, the group conducted a pre-deployment joint task force exercise off of California.
Well, that's really interesting news. So we've got more questions opening up than answers coming our way.
And, Rich, what is interesting, we were going to sort of concentrate in this phenomena radio about the pushback and why, with the idea that we were looking at, I have talked with helicopter pilots who have served in military who that they would have turned away from anything with the word UFO. And the three told me that in looking at these gun camera videos, that they were impressed with what it was that they were seeing. Now, it seems like we are now seeing that this is a sort of like a redux of releases over the past 70 years where the government wants to get out something that's real, but again, they have embedded it in something that is not real. And that this comes back to the damage control. What is it that they are trying to cover with a release that they are pretending to make it that it's all real when it's couched in wrong dates again, and that it's now raising, to my mind, they're trying to cover up something else. Is it past or Rich? Could it be that there is something coming and they are trying to prepare without compromising military secrets?
I don't know. I'd like to talk with Luis Elizondo about this. He should know. He should know everything about this case. I mean, in 04 and 05, he wasn't doing the AATI program, it's true. But according to everything that we've been told, his office was involved in analyzing that incident. He ought to know every single element of that case, and he ought to be able to answer a lot of these questions, it seems to me. He ought to be able to answer the status of the Nimitz in November of 04 or March of 05 or whatever. and he ought to be able to answer what was going on with the Princeton as well. This is, in a sense, it's his case. And I would like to know what he has to say about this, to be perfectly honest with you.
I would too.
in terms of the damage control element of this, and, let me, I don't want to go too far away from the technical details of the sightings because it's fascinating. But I don't know where else to go with it at this moment because I don't have any more technical details. But in terms of how the media has been handling this incident, I just think it's worth pointing out. Lots of folks within the UFO field were saying this is disclosure. And I was very quiet about this for a couple of weeks. I didn't really have anything to say publicly, but I didn't think that it was a disclosure. I thought it was an interesting scoop. And I thought it was a step forward, without a doubt. But again, I can't ever trust the New York Times, and I will never trust the New York Times. And then looking at how this whole thing has played out. So first of all, the New York Times itself had an editorial less than a week later that was titled "Flying Saucers and Other Fairy Tales." So that should tell you what the New York Times is about. Even in the article, one of the two articles that they put out on December 16th, the one on glowing auras and black budgets, if you really look at that article carefully, that article undercuts itself in multiple places and undermines its own themes in multiple places by it's one thing to bring in skeptical points of view, but if you really analyze the way that they brought in skeptical points of view in that article, it's absurd, honestly. They bring in a astrophysicist from MIT who had literally nothing of value to say in this article. She said something like, everyone. What is it? The thing about science is sometimes things are just unexplained. We have a phenomenon that's unexplained. And they also brought in James Oberg, who's been debunking UFOs for 40 years, or at least attempting to debunk them. And he also had nothing tangible to say in the article. He wasn't quoted of saying anything explicit other than saying that people who see things like this are usually, misled by their own perceptions, or maybe saw some new technology that no one wants to reveal, which is like a big duh normally, but specifically ignoring the details of the cases that were being written about. My take on it is that these people were simply brought in as psychological placeholders. You're reading these revelations on UFOs, and suddenly here's the New York Times piece saying, whoa, just put the brakes on, nothing to get excited about. So it was a kind of a very significant way of dampening the effect of the revelations themselves. And then they come back with an editorial in less than a week that debunks the whole thing anyway. And then the media brings out people like Neil deGrasse Tyson, and who just continues to throw cold water over this. And there's just been a lot of media pushback. Not everyone. I watched the interview that Tucker Carlson on Fox had with Fravor. That was a very good interview. It was very interesting. Carlson was clearly deeply impressed by what Fravor had to say. So there was some embracing of this in the media. And
Jeff Tapper on CNN.
Jake Tapper, yeah.
Yeah, he did an interview with Luis Elizondo, and that was the only interview where Elizondo came so close to Tapper, I think, asking twice, are you saying that this is phenomena from outer space? And he came very close to saying, well, it's my personal opinion that it probably is.
Right. Yeah, so even CNN, which is exactly equal to the New York Times as a voice of really the establishment power elite, it's very interesting that they went there. The story seems to have receded now. It's kind of gone out of the news cycle. But I do think by damage control, let's recognize one of the words in there is damage. So from a point of view of secrecy on UFOs, if you believe that there's secrecy on UFOs, which I certainly do, and I know you do, the damage was that Tom DeLonge's initiative was bringing people out who were saying things that were damaging to that secrecy. I don't think there's any other way about it. I think, frankly, if it had not been for the Tom DeLonge initiative, these articles would not have happened.
Right.
I don't think this would have come out at all. So it's a way of controlling the narrative by writing these two pieces, which, again, and the other New York Times piece, I think, was prefaced, the one on Fravers incident, was prefaced extensively by this almost pathological need by the authors to say, now, we're not saying that this is anything extraterrestrial. I mean, I'm paraphrasing them, but that's how it was prefaced.
But if you
they were handling it with such kid gloves.
If you read the December 18th, 2017, 2 days later, the full Washington Post article, which is focused on this interview with Commander David Fravor, you come away with, this is a man, he's heavy duty, and he is saying, I've never seen anything like this before, and I would like to fly one of those. And the whole article gives you the sense that this is a major military person who is saying they're UFOs, they are not from here, they have the ability to do things that our physics are completely baffled by, and I'd like to fly one. That's that article. The Washington Post really is the more enthusiastic one.
Yeah, I've got that one here too. I'm looking at it, and I agree with you. It's shockingly for the Washington Post that they were doing this. So again, the question is, like, what is going on here? The Washington Post, I remember all the various X conferences I did with Stephen Bassett during the early 2000s, and the Washington Post just ripped every one of those in such an unfair and malicious way. It was obviously policy for them to do it. And of course, the Washington Post now is owned by Bezos of Amazon, who does the
he wants to
cloud,
go into space.
He does the cloud work for all of the U.S. intelligence agencies.
And he's going to. He said he threw his gauntlet down and said he basically is going to go into a race with Elon Musk to go to Mars. Recently. So
well, that's an interesting twist, yeah.
Yeah, Bezos is getting into space, and that.
But he's also deeply involved with the whole spook community, which, because Amazon has done all the cloud computing for not just NSA but all the alphabet soup agencies, and now is the owner of the Washington Post. I mean, clearly, there's a very, very symbiotic relationship that the Post has with the national security establishment. It's so obvious. All you have to do is read the Post, and they've been doing the work for the national security establishment for a long, long time.
Well, on this whole issue of the geopolitical landscape, and Tom DeLonge starting 2 years ago, slowly unfolding that he was going to be working with people who had military and NASA background. And it was a full year ago, before the election, that the Podesta emails came out on WikiLeaks. And that's when we got to see the names of people, the head of Lockheed Skunk Works, another military person that were working with Tom DeLonge in the transcripts, in the WikiLeaks emails, where DeLonge was having some kind of a Skype meeting with John Podesta.
Right.
And he was introducing the Lockheed Skunk Works, and it was like they're coming together, and that John Podesta wants to open up the truth that we're not alone and that there are answers out there. Now, that group from before November 2016 of the earthquake with Trump becoming president, why do you think 1 year later, when they finally did the live stream, it was a whole new cast?
Yeah.
It was Semavan, it was Hal Puthoff, it was Luis Elizondo, it was Mullen, and a fifth person. Why did it all change, do you think, in 1 year?
Well, one thing I just want to say is I am not convinced that Podesta was all that sympathetic to doing the disclosure. I have not seen any evidence in any of the WikiLeaks releases that was any kind of statement by Podesta himself that was, positive toward disclosure of the UFO reality. I mean, Podesta himself has made a number of statements, and yes, it absolutely appears they did the Google Hangout, and but I mean, there's not any evidence. All the evidence that I have that I've seen is what Tom DeLonge wrote to Podesta. I'm not aware of any affirming replies from Podesta. I mean, of course, to be fair, he was running Hillary's campaign at the time and was a very busy guy. But I've never been on board really with this idea that Podesta is somehow a disclosure advocate. I've never believed it, and I don't believe it. So that's a different issue altogether. But as to why the team is different, this is a question I would like to know the answer to. Tom DeLonge had the head of Lockheed Skunk Works. He had the head of Cheyenne Mountain, one of the key people in NORAD, Cheyenne Mountain,
right?
And a major general who was running the labs at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
Right.
So, I mean, it's conceivable to me, and again, I don't know the full backstory here, that they all got scared off by the WikiLeaks revelations. It wouldn't shock me in the least. I think that they all felt burned when that stuff came out. They were really working rather quietly at the time, and suddenly everything comes out, boom. So that's more than enough to make a lot of these guys run away. But I'm only speculating.
And right now, would you say that you could project, even in speculation, what you would expect the third video? Because all of this backstory that was released with the videos by To the Stars, it says very specifically, we are releasing 3 videos. The first one to the New York Times, the second one to the Washington Post, the third one has not been identified, but others have said that they understood from, I guess, backstory with Tom DeLonge that in January of 2018, we were going to see a third video.
Oh, can we hold that, guys? Because we just got notified we're due our first break.
This 45-minute long and uninterrupted segment of Phenomenon Radio Live is brought to you by OnlineVibes.com. Your personal connection to mind, body, and spirit, connecting you with healing modalities that can manifest a true and healthy change in your life. Visit the website at OnlineVibes.com. Tonight's guest, Richard Dolan, will rejoin the show for Hour 2 right after these messages. Don't go anywhere.
This is KGRA Digital Broadcasting Station. Salt Lake City, Utah. Van Buren, Arkansas.
I'm a planner. Some of my friends say I'm a survivalist. I guess they're right, because when disaster hits, I have a survival plan, and it starts with my survivalist camp, my fully functional, off-the-grid bug-out house. And when the you-know-what hits the fan, I'm out of here. So what the heck is a survivalist camp? At first glance, it looks like a very nice RV, but it's really engineered to provide my family with 5 basic needs for survival: air, water, shelter, heat, and food. Survivalist Camps builds a camp to withstand all that nature and man can throw at it. It's fully mobile. My family and I can flee disaster fully self-sufficient in just moments. And its construction will last a lifetime. Look, if you're a planner, you need to check out survivalistcamps.com. They're like you and me. They believe a good plan is the best way to meet a disaster. Survivalistcamps.com. Be ready to be impressed. That's survivalistcamps.com. Get prepared at survivalistcamps.com.
People are waking up. They're standing up to those pushing pesticides and GMOs as safe alternatives for a starving world. What a bunch of crap! I tell you, I'd rather eat dirt. So, I drink Life Change Tea. It's an herbal drink, cleansing my body of toxic sludge and nasty chemicals, and of course, ridding the intruders that are hidden in my so-called food. And by the way, Life Change Tea is non-GMO and organic. No fillers, no yuck. Just a great defense against you-know what. May the supplement force awaken you. Don't fall to the dark side. Sorry. I went to the movies last night. Anyway, enough said. How do you get that herbal drink and change your life? GetTheTea.com. That's GetTheTea.com. You will awaken. You will get stronger, and you might even lose a bit of weight. So awaken to Life Change Tea and the many one-of-a-kind supplements at GetTheTea.com. That's GetTheTea.com. May the supplement force be with you.
I'm a grandpa young enough to hike Big Sur with my son, and that's where I had a heart attack with no way to call for help. I felt sorry for my son. He looked as desperate as I felt as he took off for help. Luckily, he ran into Anna, a fellow hiker. She had a satellite phone, called for help, and saved my life. Today, I'm healthy and never out of touch because the satellite phone store makes it affordable to be connected anytime, anywhere. The satellite phone store gave me an Inmarsat iSat-2 satellite phone free. And the monthly plan is less than I spend on coffee every month. You can have one too while supplies last. Call the satellite phone store, 877-705-8839. Remember, the satellite phone store, 877-705-8839. thesatellitephoneStore.com.
Around the world for decades have come high strangeness reports of mysterious aerial lights, beams, animal mutilations, human abductions, secret space and military programs focused on an alien presence. One reporter of these Earth mysteries is Emmy award-winning TV producer, writer, and editor Linda Moulton Howe. She reports and edits the science, environment, and real X-Files news website, Earthfiles.com.
We are moving from the paradigm that we are alone in the universe to a new one in which we are not alone. And something out there is interacting with us, our animals and plant life, forcing glimpses of other realities upon us.
Linda has produced 4 large books about these phenomena with hundreds of color images and illustrations that reviewers such as New York Times best-selling author Jim Marrs describes as an amazing accumulation of evidence. All her books, An Alien Harvest, the 2-volume Glimpses of Other Realities, and Mysterious